Herpes is truly only skin deep, but the way it messes with your mind, your heart, and every fear you've ever had can feel a hell of a lot more painful than any outbreaks you'll ever experience. But here's the thing. If herpes were truly responsible for ruining someone's confidence, then every single person who got diagnosed would react the same way. But they don't. Some people get the news and they move on with their life while others feel like their life is over. So why do some people fall apart and others don't? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to unpack for you, because this goes way deeper than your diagnosis. So if you've ever wondered why getting the news hits you so hard, or why it feels like it changed everything about who you are and who you feel you get to be, you're going to discover the real reason why today. So let's get into it on this episode of Herpes Wellness. Hi, I'm Dupree, and I help people to navigate life with herpes. This is part 1 of a 10-part series called Shift Your Mindset About Herpes. Each week, I'm going to share one of the 10 things that helped me to take my power back so that herpes no longer controlled the way I saw myself or the way I lived my life. But to begin, when I was diagnosed, I went into such a downward spiral. I questioned my worth, my decisions, and I felt like my love life was done. I thought my life changed in the worst possible way, and I believed that for a really long time. But here's what I learned. Herpes wasn't responsible for taking anything away from me. I was. I chose to shut down, to pull back, and I treated myself like I didn't deserve anything good anymore. But slowly, over time, I realized I could either choose to keep living that way or I could choose to rebuild myself from the inside out. And that's exactly what I did. And now I'm here talking to you today as someone who built a life I absolutely love waking up to. Not only that, I'm in a relationship with the love of my life, and I've created a life that's better than anything I ever had before I was diagnosed. I share this with you not to gloat, but because I want you to understand something. Your diagnosis doesn't remove the possibility of you having an amazing life. You're not stuck, you're not limited, and you're not done. If anything, this is only the beginning, and it can be the shift that brings out a version of you that you never even knew existed. And this is why we're going to dig a little deeper. Because once you understand what's actually happening underneath the surface, and that your diagnosis is truly only skin deep, your entire experience and the way you see herpes can start to change. Look, the physical symptoms can be painful and unpredictable. I mean, you could literally go months or even years without an outbreak, and then out of nowhere, it shows up again. But the symptoms aren't the reason why people fall apart. It's the meaning behind them and the story you tell yourself the second something shows up. And that story usually goes something like, no, not again. No one is ever going to want to be with me. I feel so unlovable and my entire life is ruined. But here's the truth. Having an outbreak isn't what really makes you feel this way. It's the meaning you're giving it, which includes the fear and the shame that the outside world makes you believe, as if herpes somehow changed your worth overnight. But herpes doesn't tell you you're unworthy. It doesn't tell you that your future is over or that you're undesirable. Those thoughts and your reaction comes from somewhere else entirely. And that's what we're going to need to dig into. Because what's really going on is that your diagnosis is bringing up fears and beliefs you've been carrying around for a long time, way before you ever got the news. That's why people respond so differently to the same diagnosis. It's not because one person is stronger. It's because they weren't carrying the same emotional baggage before their diagnosis. Herpes didn't come in and change who you are now. It just exposed what was already under the surface. And once you uncover where those feelings come from, you stop letting your diagnosis define you and you begin to take your power back. Here's something most people don't realize about getting diagnosed. Your reaction has just as much to do with your nervous system as it does with your thoughts. When you hear the words, "you have herpes," your body reacts before your mind has a chance to process anything. Your system goes straight into panic mode. Your heart drops, and you feel a pit in your stomach because your brain labels it as a threat, even though herpes typically isn't a dangerous condition. And that reaction happens automatically. But it's not about herpes itself. It's about your body trying to protect you from something that it fully doesn't understand yet. So when people say they feel shocked, numb, sick, or like the floor just dropped out from underneath them, that's a normal nervous system response, and it's the same response you'd have to any news that feels sudden or overwhelming. And here's the important thing. Your brain doesn't care whether something is medically serious or not. It reacts based on the meaning it thinks the situation has. So if you've grown up around years of stigma about herpes, like the majority of us have, your nervous system fires off as if something life-changing just happened. So you're not actually reacting to the virus. You're reacting to your body trying to make sense of something it wasn't prepared for. And when that happens, your system goes straight into fight or flight. This is why you can feel completely thrown off, even when you know that the physical condition itself is manageable. And once you understand this, you can begin uncovering where your feelings are actually coming from. So I'm going to break things down even further, because this is where things start to make sense. When your reaction to something feels bigger than the situation, that's not you being dramatic. That's your brain reacting to what it was programmed to believe a long time ago. In trauma work, they say today's triggers are yesterday's wounds, meaning that your mind connects current experiences to past emotional pain, even when the situations have nothing to do with one another. So if you grew up feeling ignored, rejected, not enough, unworthy, or that love always had conditions, then hearing the words, "you have herpes," doesn't just connect to the present, it connects to your past. And for most people, the diagnosis comes out of nowhere. It's shocking, and it can also feel like it blindsides you. Maybe someone didn't tell you about their diagnosis, or the person who gave it to you didn't even know that they had it. And suddenly, your entire system is trying to make sense of something you never expected to deal with. So yes, the shock is real. But the part that keeps you headed into a downward spiral isn't from the diagnosis itself. It's from what the diagnosis triggers inside of you. Herpes didn't create any of those old beliefs that you have about yourself. It just stirs up the ones that were already sitting there. So, in essence, you're not reacting only to the moment you get the news. You're responding to the way you learned how to respond to these type of things years before herpes ever showed up. Your brain literally learned behavioral patterns long before your diagnosis, and then learned the best way to defend itself against a particular threat. For example, it learned how to react to rejection. It learned how to react to fear, and it learned how to react to when something unexpected made you feel unsafe or not good enough. So when something new comes along, especially something with a huge stigma attached to it, your brain grabs onto the closest emotional memory it already has from a past trauma and reacts from that place. Now, let's talk about what's actually happening underneath all this, because this is where you start to get your power back. When something like a herpes diagnosis triggers old trauma, it's not random. Like I mentioned before, your mind is connecting the moment you receive your diagnosis to things that you went through long before herpes ever showed up, right? And the only way to break that pattern is to understand the emotion of what it's being connected to. There's actually a name for this, and the idea comes from a person by the name of Carl Jung. And for those of you who aren't familiar with who he is or his work, Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and one of the most influential voices in modern psychology. And one of the things he's best known for is introducing the idea of the shadow self, which basically refers to the parts of you that got pushed down because you learned they were unacceptable. Those parts come from how you were treated when you were growing up. Your anger, your needs, your fear, your sadness, your voice, your intensity, and your vulnerability. Somewhere along the line, you learned that certain parts of you were either too much or not enough. So you shoved them down to survive whatever environment you were raised in. Because you become the product of your environment, meaning the way you were treated, spoken to, and how you responded growing up shaped how you learned to think, react, and how to protect yourself. You didn't choose these patterns, you adapted to them. But those things didn't just disappear. They got buried in your subconscious, and from there, they started influencing how you respond to anything that feels threatening. That's your shadow. And when a diagnosis shows up in your life, or something unexpected, or even something that messes with your sense of safety, your shadow is the first thing that comes out of hiding. Not because herpes is dangerous, but because your brain thinks it matches an old experience where you felt unsafe, unworthy, or not chosen. Neuroscience actually backs this up. Your brain organizes emotional memories into patterns. Then when something in the present feels even slightly similar to an old wound, your brain replays the old response, not just the part that applies to today. That's why your reaction feels so intense. Not because you're feeling this moment, but because you're feeling every moment that taught you to doubt yourself and your worth. But here's the part that matters most. Your awareness of what's happening changes your brain. That's neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity simply means that you can learn to rewire and reprogram your mind at any time or at any age. So once you start bringing your unconscious patterns out into the open, you understand what they're tied to, and you name what your emotional triggers are, your brain literally starts to rewire itself. Shadow work, by the way, isn't about digging up your entire life story, but it's about finally looking at the parts of yourself you've been avoiding so you can stop letting them control your reactions. When you do that, your diagnosis stops feeling like it controls your life because it never controlled your life in the first place. Your old patterns did. So let's get into how you can change those patterns so that you can take your power back. And just so you know, this doesn't only work for your diagnosis, by the way. This helps you take your power back in every part of your life. Because once you understand your triggers, you're able to take control of your emotions and choose how you respond to any situation. And that's truly life-changing. All right. If you're ready to start shifting the patterns that herpes brought to the surface, here are 5 steps you can take to start breaking down and eliminating old beliefs. This is where you get the chance to figure out where your emotions come from and how they've been shaping the way you now see yourself after your diagnosis. Number 1, write down exactly what you're thinking. grab a notebook or a journal and write every negative thought you've been repeating to yourself. Don't sugarcoat anything and don't edit or cross anything out either. If it came to mind and you wrote it down, then that's the truth about how you really feel. Thoughts I had about myself after I received my diagnosis were things like, I'm unlovable, I screwed up my life, no one is going to want to be with me, I'm so undesirable, and I should have known better. When these thoughts stay in your head on a cycle of repeat, they feel real because your mind can't tell the difference between what is real and what isn't. So if you believe that your thoughts are real, then they become your reality. But when you write them down and you put them right in front of you, you can see what you're really dealing with. And then you can begin to address them one by one. Number 2, choose the belief that triggers you the most. Now that everything is on paper, read your list and pay attention to which thought feels the most familiar. Not dramatic or overwhelming. Just the one that feels the most true right now in your day-to-day life, even if you don't want it to be. Maybe it's the one you've repeated for years. Maybe it's the one that shows up every time something goes wrong, or maybe it's the one you're tired of believing about yourself. Whatever it is, circle that one, because that's the belief that has shaped more choices and reactions than you realize, and it's where the real work begins. Number 3, figure out where that belief started. Once you've circled the belief you want to work on, ask yourself a few honest questions. When is the first time I remember feeling this way? Who made me feel this way? Was it something someone said or how someone treated me? Did it come from being ignored, being rejected, or did it make me feel small? You don't need a perfect memory. You're just looking for the moment or the pattern that taught you that belief. Most people are surprised at how quickly their mind brings up the answer. And that's because it's been sitting there for a long time. And now you're actually making space to see it. This is how you separate your present for what you've been carrying all this time. Number 4, write the memory out as clearly as you can. Whatever memory came up, put it down on paper. Just write what you remember, what happened, who was involved, and how you interpreted that moment and what you started believing about yourself because of it. You're not trying to recreate the past, you're just giving yourself context. Why does this matter? Because once you see the moment that created the belief, you can finally separate your diagnosis from your identity. And when you get the memory out in front of you, you can actually work with the real source of the emotion instead of blaming your diagnosis for everything you're feeling now. There's actually research behind this. It's called memory reconciliation. It shows you that when you look at an old emotional memory with a new understanding, your brain can actually update the way it responds to it, which means your reaction to your diagnosis starts to change because your brain is no longer linking it to that old experience anymore. And this is usually the moment people realize, oh, wow, this belief actually didn't start with my diagnosis. It started way before that. And that kind of clarity is what starts to shift everything for you. And finally, number 5, choose another belief and keep going. Once you've worked through the first belief, go back to your list whenever you're ready and choose another one. Not because you need to fix everything at once, but because each belief you uncover gives you more control over how you think, feel, and respond. Every time you go through this process, you're separating your diagnosis from the thoughts you've been carrying around for years. You're teaching your brain a new way to respond instead of defaulting to old patterns that were never about herpes to begin with. Doing this inner work gives you clarity, emotional space, and most importantly, it gives you the ability to see yourself without fear or shame driving the way you think. And the more that you do this, the less power your diagnosis has, because you now understand why it was making you feel the way that you do. And now you'll know how to work with it. This is how you move forward, not by burying your feelings or pretending they don't exist, but by taking the time to understand them so that you can finally respond from the present and not the past. At the end of the day, this work is about taking ownership of how you think. You can't change the past, but you can understand the patterns it left behind. And once you start seeing where your reactions actually come from, you stop blaming your diagnosis for feelings that were there long before it. When you start to understand your triggers and what they're tied to, you take your power back. And when you learn how to work with your mind instead of getting pulled into old patterns, everything shifts from how you see yourself to how you show up and what you believe you deserve. Your diagnosis doesn't get to decide any of that. You do. So that's all I have for today. I hope that this episode was helpful to you. I really enjoyed sharing something that started to turn my life around after my diagnosis. If you have any questions or something that you would like to add, and if you're watching on YouTube, please drop it in the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, whether you're listening on audio or watching on YouTube, please make sure that you do that so you don't miss future episodes. And if you want to be a part of our community, go to herpeswellness.com and sign up for the free support membership. There you'll get access to our forums where you can connect with others, ask questions, and get support from people who actually get what you're going through. Also, you can download the Herpes Wellness app, which is both available in the App Store and in Google Play. I put those links in the description box below, along with a link to our website. And if you're enjoying this podcast or there's something specific you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you the next time on the Herpes Wellness Podcast. Bye for now.